Hello, this is Dino Patti Djalal. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Muslim Imran, who is the chairman of the Palestinian Cultural Organization Malaysia. He is based in Kuala Lumpur and he's in Jakarta to meet friends and also engage in discussions with groups that are paying attention to developments in Palestine. Welcome, Pa Muslim. Welcome to Jakarta.
Thank you very much, buddy.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also the organization that you represent?
Yeah, thank you for having me on this show. A great day to you and to followers of the foreign policy community of Indonesia. The Palestine Cultural Organization is Palestine Malaysia advocacy group based in Kuala Lumpur. We were launched by a group of activists, Palestinian and Malaysian, and we had the blessings and support of Dr. Mahathir from day one. And lucky for us, we started our activities with a very active Malaysian civil society, and in the following years we went beyond Malaysia. Now we are reaching out to the region, and this explains why I'm here in Jakarta today to meet your good office and the Indonesian friends.
Yes, well, you are among friends, so thank you for visiting us. Tell us what is how is the situation now in Palestine, especially politically, in terms of its political development?
Palestine is one of the few remnant colonial struggles in this 21st century, and knowing that the Palestinians continue to resist by all means possible. It's unfortunate that the Israeli society is moving towards the right in recent years, and this, in a way, created an apartheid system in Palestine. Now, the international community is coming to recognize that. The Israeli state, although was created some 74 years ago, but its expansionist nature and its right-leaning elite started to push it to become an apartheid. So it's a colonial occupation that has transformed itself into an apartheid as well. And it's good that the international community is recognizing that. In 2017, the West Asia United Nations Commission issued the first official report that documents Israel's apartheid policies. This was followed in 2020 by Israel's leading human rights groups, B'Tselem, which also issued a similar report documenting how Israel has become an apartheid. It was followed later by Human Rights Watch. In 2021, they also issued a report explaining how Israel's policies against the Palestinians is nothing but an apartheid. And most recently, in February this year, we saw Amnesty International coming out as well, expressing its support for the end of apartheid over the Palestinians with a lengthy, well-documented report. This is now an ongoing development. Our people continue to be steadfast, but unfortunately, Israel's brutality increases. We've seen that in May last year, how Israel's aggression on the Islamic and earlier the Christian sanctuaries in Jerusalem pushed things towards a big war. They tried to distract the international attention from the situation in Jerusalem by launching a military strike and military attack on Gaza, but things went out of hand and it became an all-out war. And I don't think that was the last war. Things might actually develop in the same direction this coming fasting month if the Israeli government continues to think the same way. Now their society is turning right. Their political elite now are more extremist than before. Some 20 or 25 years ago, the same political leaders that are considered to be extremists in Israel are now center. People like Netanyahu used to be considered extremist in the 1990s. Today, compared to the current prime minister and to the rest of the political elite, Netanyahu is considered the center right leader, which is a shocking development. So the Israeli political elite is moving right. Their policies, therefore, are becoming more populist, more brutal in their treatment of the Palestinians, and this will certainly dictate resistance. So I do expect a very hot summer this year.
Yeah. So within that political environment where, in your view, the political spectrum in Israel is moving more and more to the right, is the objective of establishing a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine would live side by side in peace and security, is that becoming more elusive or less elusive?
Yeah. Israel's policies are making this an impossible solution. The number of Israeli settlers who moved into the West Bank over the last 2 decades is almost 1 million. At least 600,000 reside in the West Bank currently, and these are extremist, religious, right-wing, settlers. They come from Brooklyn or from Russia to stay, not to live. The Israeli annexation of the West Bank is taking shape every day. It's not an announcement. Some people expect that the Israeli government will wake up in a good morning and say that we are annexing the West Bank. It's not happening that way. It's a daily process. Today, I think that there were some announcements of another 1,200 housing units in the occupied West Bank. So they are making the two-state solution impossible. That the two-state solution was the perfect solution. Palestinians gave a chance to this peaceful settlement, but apparently it wasn't. Israel wasn't serious about it. Israel was paying lip service to the two-state solution in order to get the PR out of it, but in reality they were killing our future state. We don't have a viable Palestinian state. You look at the map now of Palestine. We have a small archipelago of Palestinian administrative units in the West Bank, and we have a blockaded Gaza. There is no connection whatsoever between all these territories. Our state institutions are undermined day and night by the Israeli administration. Our economy is being undermined by the Israeli administration. How are we going to achieve our own state? Even if we still insist on trying out this solution, Israel is not giving it any chance. That's why Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and even Israel's leading human rights groups are actually joining the Palestinian calls to end apartheid. Mm-hmm. Ending apartheid means no, the whole system has to be deconstructed and give people their freedom to decide what they want.
Yeah. How old are you now?
I'm 37.
37. Do you think by the time you're 55, for example, you will see the establishment of a Palestinian state, independent and sovereign?
I am kind of certain that there will be a free Palestine in 20 years' time. Reading the history of the
Palestinian
region,
state. Yeah.
I do believe we will be free, whether it's a Palestinian state, whether we whatever we
with
name
the borders being resolved.
The current Israeli occupation, the current Israeli colonial settler colonial occupation won't be there in 20 years. I read the history of the region. I read the history of Palestine. The Crusades lasted in Palestine for decades, but eventually they were uprooted because they continued to identify as a foreign occupation of the region. They never wanted to be a part of the region. Israel is repeating the mistakes of the Crusades. They came in as at first as immigrants. They established their own institutions. They took over our country by force through a process of ethnic cleansing that is well documented by Israeli historians themselves in 1948. And eventually they weren't satisfied with what they got. They continue to refuse to be a natural part of the region. They continue to try to expand. Very recently, they officially annexed the Golan Heights of Syria. That's not the attitude of a country that's trying to be a natural part of the region. That's why I think they are following the futile steps of the Crusades. You become too powerful, too arrogant, you impose an apartheid like what happened in South Africa, you force everybody to resist you. And this will bring down the occupation. The dynamics might not be so clear. There are so many models. There is a South African model. There is the collapse of the Yugoslavian state, the collapse of the Soviet Union. For that sake, it was a powerful power, but being powerful isn't enough. There are many principles that you have to uphold in order to survive.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned apartheid, and I'm thinking of South Africa now, and the reason South Africa was successful in ending apartheid and transforming itself to become an open, multicultural, multiracial, democratic society was there was some degree of unity in South Africa, and I don't see that in Palestine. It remains divided, especially between Fatah and Hamas. and I don't see that being reconciled. Can you give me your update on that political situation?
The Palestinian society is very dynamic politically. There are many factions in the PLO, there are many factions outside the PLO, and they all have their own perspectives when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But they all, or most of them, agree on certain principles. Liberation of Palestine, establishing a Palestinian state, they all agree on that. Ideology is there, but it's not the most pressing issue to these Palestinian factions. And I think Palestinian nationalism is really dominant across all political differences. These groups have made mistakes in the past. They have to acknowledge that. Throughout the 20th century, Fatah dominated the PLO. It did not give a chance to others, socialists and others, to play an active role in leading the Palestinians. This eventually, made the PLO very rigid. When Hamas tried to join the Palestinian political system, it won the elections, but the system just couldn't accept it. Fatah was too dominant for decades, and eventually a Palestinian division occurred in the 2006-2007, and to a very large extent, this was externally manufactured or engineered by certain powers which wanted the Palestinians to be divided. They talked a lot about democratization of the Middle East, and when things started to take shape, they rejected the results of the democracy that took place. Hamas won, but the US rejected the results of the elections. Both sides made mistakes, but eventually, I think 15 years later, I see that both Palestinian factions realized that some mistakes happened. You can't cancel each other. You have to work together in order to achieve liberation. That's why a dialogue has been taking place over the last few years. Agreements were made. Eventually, we were supposed to have elections in 2021. It was very unfortunate that President Abbas pulled out of elections. He canceled elections in the last minute. We have a problem of an aging leadership in not only in Palestine but in the Arab world in general.
Yeah.
That's I would say a regional dilemma that the people of the region have to solve. But in Palestine, this does not stop dialogue. Dialogue is there. We need, I would say, we need external, positive external interference to bring the Palestinian groups together.
Yeah.
The Egyptians have tried. The Turks very recently have tried. Qatar has tried, and I think if Indonesia, being one of the major states in the OIC, can put on some pressure on these Palestinian factions, things might work.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, as an Indonesian, the reason why we gained independence in 1945 was because despite our diversity and so many different political interests and affiliations, we were united. And that's how we were able to defeat the colonialist powers, right? And I think for us in Indonesia, it's a bit frustrating. It's a lot frustrating, actually, to see the Palestinian leadership have not reached the unity that they need in order to, to function coherently as a political entity. I think that's what hurts the Palestinian struggle the most. And again, I don't have the solution for it, but whatever solution, it has to come from the Palestinian leadership. They have to come above their rivalries or their traditional ways of doing things. Let's talk about democracy now in Palestine. And I understand it's not in very good shape if we judge by elections, right? When was the last election?
Yeah, our last parliamentary elections were in 2006.
That's 16 years ago. And presidential elections?
1 year before that. So
yes.
17 years.
And efforts to revive the elections in 2019, they did not happen.
There is public demand, there is public pressure, yes. But it won't be fair to blame one person for the delay of elections. But having a president whose powers are calling the elections means that he has to be the one who decides when elections are the Palestinian political groups have agreed on several occasions when to have elections, how to have elections. We have even reformed our electoral system. We had a mixed system. The Palestinian political groups agreed in 2020 to have a list system, full list. But towards the end of the preparatory period, President Abbas called off the elections, and he cited some outside pressure and Israel not allowing us to have elections in Jerusalem, which I think was possible to overcome if he was serious enough about having elections. Probably the problem is in lack of democracy within the context of the PLO and the political system, the Palestinian political system. We've had a pre-PLO political system towards until the 60s. We've had the PLO political system, which was not very democratic. And since 1993, we have been having the Palestinian Authority political system. I would say that this is the third phase of our political system. If we don't reform it, if we don't rebuild the Palestinian political institutions, this system will be defunct very soon. And
I agree. Yeah.
We will have a change because we have a generational change. Mm-hmm. The last elections were held when I was a school kid. I've not had the chance to vote for 15 or 16 years because of this political leadership.
That is quite sad. And I think that's one thing Palestine can learn from Indonesia, because since 1997 we have this attitude, whatever happens attitude, which means whatever happens, we're going to have elections every 5 years, no matter what happens, right? So we've had it in 2004, 2009, 14, 19, and so on. And that discipline and that will has really made our democracy stronger. So I think that should be done in Palestine. No matter what happens, they have to have it. With all the weaknesses,
Occupation is, of course, a problem. Yeah. It's a serious, contextual hindrance for our democracy. But we still can do something. Yeah. We are having municipal elections tomorrow, in fact, in the West Bank. So if we're able to have our, Wali Kota elections, why won't we have the parliamentary elections, the political ones? It's possible to have it, but the political will has to be there.
Yes. You seem to be optimistic person. I'm just wondering, people 18 years older in Palestine, are they generally pessimistic, cynical, fatalistic, or optimistic? Generally,
we need to have an opinion poll to see what people's views
There's
are.
not much polls in
there are some active think tanks, but I would say you look at the developments on the ground. They tell you about people's perceptions and aspirations. In the last 3 years, different groups have been following the trends. The resistance activities in the year 2021 were 2 times more than the resistant activities in 2020. This year, 2022, the trend is still growing. And when I talk about resistant activities, that includes all sorts of resistant activities: demonstrations, civil disobedience, boycott activities, sometimes direct clashes with Israeli occupation soldiers. That means the current generation is trying to do something. This has not been the trend in the last decade. This is changing towards the last few years, and I think because Israel is pushing us towards that end.
Do you see the pendulum in Israel moving again more towards the center, or you don't see that as possible?
I don't think so. Since the year 2000, Israel has been run by right-wing governments. And the Israeli left, which created Israel, by the way, the Israeli secular left, is now history. Look at parties like the Labour Party and Meretz. They have less than 10 seats in the parliament. I think way less than that. They are becoming, a part of the Israeli history. The Israeli state was created based on a lot of superstitions which were promoted by Israeli ideologues. This current Israeli generation has believed those myths. They are fed a lot of extremist Zionist ideology. This is Zionism is a defunct ideology. If you look at their ideas, I don't think it's very distinguishable from Nazi ideology or fascist ideologies of Europe. In fact, it originated from Europe around the same time that these two extremist ideologies emerged in Europe. But Zionism survived for over a century. This defunct ideology has to be reviewed, has to be stopped. If this happens, if the Israeli society comes to a realization that we are not superior to others, we cannot force other people out of their homelands. If they come to this realization, I do believe that peace will prevail, but they're yet to be there. Maybe some sort of shock will help them do so.
Okay. How is Indonesia being seen by Palestinians? And I understand there are some Indonesian activities there, building hospitals and so
Yes,
on.
of course.
I think there was a football game that was arranged several years ago. Indonesian soccer team went to.
There is a very favorable view of Indonesia and Palestine.
Yeah.
You see the Indonesian flags flying in Gaza, for instance, during rallies, during the Great Return March. The contributions of the Indonesian people are very significant. We are at the end of the day a small nation. And your contributions on the humanitarian level are very significant, very visible. The Indonesian hospital in Gaza, for instance, which was a contribution from civil society groups, and the layman here in Indonesia contributed to build that hospital, is one of the most important hospitals in Gaza. The other forms of support, like political support, is also visible in the United Nations in particular. We are glad to see that the Indonesian foreign minister, the Indonesian officials repeatedly highlight the Palestinian issue and make sure that the international community talks about it. But of course, we have our concerns. We hope that this strong political support will not be undermined by normalization efforts and other efforts to isolate the Palestinians. Because the way I see normalization with Israel that is taking place now, particularly in the Middle East, it's undermining our struggle. It's not adding any significant.
Do you feel Palestine is becoming more isolated than before?
The international solidarity is on the rise on the civil society level in countries where we never imagined Palestine would be supported, in the US, in the UK, in Europe. But unfortunately, in some Middle Eastern countries, our issue is being sidelined. Why is that so? I believe regime survival in some cases, other priorities in other cases. But I don't think that reflects the public opinion in the Arab countries. We've just discussed democracy in Palestine and the Arab world. It's not something that is very common in the region. So people's opinion I think, identify with Palestine. But certain political leaders, for regime survival, or sometimes for individual survival, opt to open up to Israel. That is not going to help the Palestinians, and that is not going to help their states.
Last question. You're here in Indonesia, and you're talking to groups. What do you hope that Indonesian can do beyond expressing support for the Palestinian independence?
I think a lot. Indonesia provides a model. You have undergone occupation for centuries, and you've resisted this occupation by all means possible. Not one foreign occupation, but several foreign occupations. But eventually you led your people to freedom. You established an independent state. You moved towards economic development. You moved towards democratization. And now Indonesia is like the largest direct democracy in the world. It's one of the largest economies in the world, top 20. It's heading towards greater heights. Your foreign policy is being reinvigorated. So I think we look at Indonesia as a model, not just as a brotherly nation, but as a model. We in Palestine can be free someday. We will be a democracy. We will have an economic development. But in order to achieve all that, we need your involvement. Israel, unfortunately, has many in the West and has the US on their side. So we can't afford to lose you. We do need major OIC member states to be wholeheartedly on our side, supporting us politically, economically, on the people-to-people level and other levels. For instance, what Indonesia can do is to bring Palestinians and education here. We have an educated society, but it won't hurt if we have a number of scholarships in your good universities here. It won't, I think, be a waste of resources if you get the Palestinians to come and do exchange programs, cultural exchange programs, training programs. There is a lot that you have to offer and you can offer. One of the things they can do is nation building. And I believe your foreign ministry and your agencies have contributed in the past some training courses. But I hope this can be taken to the next level, and you could include all Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank in these programs. And one final hope is that Indonesia can play a role in reconciling the Palestinians politically. We don't.
Is that possible?
It is. It is because we've had different regional powers like Egypt in the past contributing towards Palestinian reconciliation. It worked several times in the past. Of course, there are a lot of external factors why it did not succeed completely. But Indonesia can play a role, and Indonesia tried in Afghanistan at one point of time. You have a good, experience in Aceh. You have a good experience in many other issues. Why don't you do that with us?
And that would be accepted by the parties, you think?
I think you are very, very well revered in Palestine by Hamas and Fatah. President Abbas has visited Indonesia many times. Hamas leaders have met with the Indonesian leaders on several occasions. So why not?
Okay. Well, I wish we can talk for another hour, Imran, and it's been a pleasure listening to you. I hope one day, 10 years or 20 years from now, we will be able to sip coffee in Palestine that is independent and living in peace in a two-state solution which Indonesia supports. So thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again in Indonesia.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope to really see you in Palestine, hopefully soon when it's spring.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.